why you'll never feel satisfied, and the philosopher who explained it, the psychology of becoming impossible to ignore, what Machiavelli, Stoicism, and modern science actually teach about respect. Some people enter a room and appear to change its atmosphere without raising their voice. Others work harder, speak more frequently, and make themselves constantly available, yet still feel overlooked. Their messages receive delayed replies. Their contribution is taken for granted. Their loyalty is expected rather than valued. Their absence barely registers. This painful difference has created an enormous online market for content, promising to transform ordinary men into supposedly dangerous, untouchable, or high-value figures. The formula is usually familiar: become scarce, reveal less, control your emotions, refuse to explain yourself, and withdraw your attention from anyone who fails to appreciate you. Machiavelli is often invoked as the intellectual authority behind the advice, while Stoicism is presented as a system for suppressing vulnerability. Some of these principles contain genuine insight. Discipline matters. Boundaries matter. Competence, self-control, and independence can transform the way a person is perceived, but the online version frequently crosses an important line. Healthy independence becomes deliberate emotional unavailability. Self-respect becomes calculated coldness. Boundaries become punishment. Silence becomes manipulation. Relationships are reduced to contests over who appears to care least. The result is not strength. It is often insecurity, disguised as strategy. The real psychology of respect is more complex and ultimately more useful. It combines autonomy with connection, confidence with evidence, emotional control with emotional honesty, and personal boundaries with clear communication. This analysis presents 8 laws for becoming impossible to ignore, including scarcity, disciplined presence, emotional control, reputation management, usefulness, and strategic absence. Its most defensible message is that people should stop chasing validation and build lives with greater substance. Its weakness is the repeated implication that respect depends on keeping others psychologically uncertain or making access deliberately difficult. To understand what genuinely makes someone respected, it is necessary to separate 3 different things: Machiavellian power, Stoic self-command, and the findings of modern psychology. Why some people are overlooked. Being overlooked is not always evidence that a person lacks value. People can be ignored because of prejudice, dysfunctional workplaces, unhealthy relationships, poor leadership, social exclusion, or simple bad luck. It would be dangerously simplistic to argue that everyone receives exactly the treatment their conduct deserves. Nevertheless, behavior does shape perception. People continually form judgments from signals such as posture, reliability, communication, confidence, emotional stability, and demonstrated ability. They notice whether someone keeps commitments, tolerates repeated disrespect, speaks with clarity, or changes direction whenever approval is withdrawn. A person who constantly abandons their priorities to remain available can unintentionally communicate that their time has little value. Someone who repeatedly accepts broken promises may teach others that there is no meaningful consequence for disappointing them. A person who over-explains every decision can appear uncertain even when the decision itself is reasonable. This does not mean kindness causes disrespect. Kindness without boundaries, however, can become indistinguishable from compliance. The distinction matters. A generous person chooses to help. A compliant person feels unable to refuse. A loyal person remains committed where mutual respect exists. A dependent person remains even when loyalty is repeatedly exploited. The outward behavior may initially look similar, but its psychological foundation is entirely different. What Machiavelli actually understood about power. Niccolò Machiavelli remains one of history's most frequently quoted and misrepresented political thinkers. He is often reduced to a collection of cynical slogans suggesting that deception, fear, and ruthlessness are always superior to morality. His actual work was more specific. Machiavelli was primarily analyzing political power, how rulers acquire it, maintain it, and lose it in unstable political environments. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy describes power as central to Machiavelli's understanding of political activity. His work rejected the comforting assumption that moral goodness alone was sufficient to secure political authority. Successful rulers, in his account, needed to understand how power operated in practice rather than merely how philosophers believed it ought to operate. That insight remains relevant far beyond Renaissance government. Intentions are not always visible. Outcomes, patterns, and positions are. A manager may intend to appear approachable but become perceived as weak if serious misconduct never produces consequences. A partner may intend to demonstrate love but communicate dependency by repeatedly tolerating humiliation. An employee may intend to appear committed but undermine their negotiating position by making unlimited availability the permanent expectation. Machiavelli understood that reputation influences behavior before direct force becomes necessary. Political authority partly depends on what people believe a ruler is capable of doing. Applied responsibly to ordinary life, this means boundaries must be credible. A boundary that is endlessly announced but never enforced is not a boundary. It is a request. A promise that is repeatedly broken loses meaning. A standard that disappears whenever someone attractive, powerful, or emotionally significant challenges it was never firmly established. However, Machiavelli's framework cannot simply be transferred from political survival to friendship, romance, and family life. A prince maintaining control over a volatile state is not the same as a partner building intimacy. The methods that secure obedience can destroy trust. Fear may influence behavior, but it does not create secure attachment, genuine loyalty, or emotional safety. This is where much online dark psychology advice goes wrong. It applies a theory of political control to relationships that require cooperation. Scarcity can increase attention, but it can also destroy trust. One of the central claims is that availability reduces value while scarcity increases it. There is some psychological and commercial evidence behind the broader scarcity principle. Research in consumer psychology has repeatedly found that perceived scarcity can increase attention, urgency, and perceived desirability under certain conditions. People may interpret restricted availability as evidence that something is popular, exclusive, or valuable. But people are not products. Even within marketing, scarcity does not work automatically. Research has found that scarcity appeals can provoke suspicion when audiences perceive them as manipulative or deceptive. In such circumstances, scarcity can reduce trust and purchase intentions rather than increase them. The same distinction applies to human relationships. There is a major difference between having a full life and manufacturing distance. Someone becomes naturally less available when they have responsibilities, goals, friendships, interests, and standards. Their time is limited because their life contains meaningful commitments. Manufactured scarcity is different. It involves delaying, replies purely to trigger anxiety, withdrawing affection to gain leverage, or disappearing so another person becomes frightened of losing access. The first can produce respect. The second creates instability. Healthy scarcity is a consequence of purpose. Manipulative scarcity is a performance designed to control someone else's emotional state. A person with genuine self-respect does not need to answer every message immediately, nor do they need to stare at a clock to ensure they wait exactly 3 hours before responding. They reply when practical and appropriate, not when anxiety commands them, and not according to an artificial script. Stoicism is not emotional numbness. Stoicism is another philosophy routinely distorted by modern self-improvement culture. The popular caricature presents the Stoic as a man who feels nothing, reveals nothing, and remains emotionally inaccessible. Anger, sadness, and fear are treated as evidence of weakness. Silence is glorified, while vulnerability is portrayed as surrender. Ancient Stoicism was not a project of becoming emotionally dead. It was concerned with judgment, virtue, reason, and the distinction between what a person can and cannot control. The Stoic objective was not to erase every feeling, but to prevent uncontrolled passions and false judgments from governing conduct. That is closer to emotional regulation than emotional suppression. Emotional regulation involves noticing an emotional response, understanding it, and deciding how to act. Suppression involves attempting to conceal or push down the emotion after it has already arisen. The difference is substantial. A regulated person may feel furious, but decide not to send a destructive message. They may feel rejected, but refuse to abandon their dignity. They may feel anxious, but continue acting according to evidence rather than panic. A suppressive person tries to convince themselves and everyone else that the emotion does not exist. Research has repeatedly associated habitual emotional suppression with social costs. One influential study found that suppression predicted less social support, reduced closeness, and lower social satisfaction. Other research has associated greater suppression with worse relationships, less positive emotion, and poorer quality of life. This makes sense. Intimacy requires some emotional visibility. A person who never expresses fear, affection, uncertainty, or disappointment may appear controlled, but they may also become impossible to know. The strongest version of Stoicism is therefore not feel nothing. It is feel fully, judge carefully, and act deliberately. The difference between boundaries and punishment. This identifies boundaries as essential. It also repeatedly suggests that disrespect should lead to reduced access. That principle can be healthy. When someone repeatedly lies, insults, manipulates, or exploits, continuing to provide unlimited access may reinforce the conduct. Distance can be necessary. In severe circumstances, ending contact may be the safest and most rational response. The problem arises when distance becomes a substitute for communication. A boundary states what a person will accept and what they will do when the standard is breached. Punishment is designed primarily to cause discomfort, fear, or regret. Consider the difference. I won't continue this conversation while I'm being insulted. We can speak later when it is calmer. That is a boundary. I'm going to disappear without explanation until you panic and realize what you have lost. That is punishment and manipulation. The distinction is not softness. It is precision. Healthy boundaries clarify responsibility. Manipulative withdrawal manufactures uncertainty. The first protects dignity. The second attempts to dominate another person's nervous system. Research on romantic communication has repeatedly linked withdrawal patterns with poorer relationship outcomes. Demand-withdrawal dynamics, in which one person pushes for engagement while the other retreats, can predict declining satisfaction. More recent research has also associated attachment avoidance with lower satisfaction through mutual withdrawal patterns. There are situations in which no further explanation is required, particularly after a pattern has already been clearly addressed. But never explain yourself is a poor universal rule. Strong people communicate when communication is useful. They stop communicating when the evidence shows that further discussion will only recycle the same dysfunction. Real confidence is built from evidence. One of the strongest observations is that confidence without evidence becomes theater. Confidence is not merely a tone of voice, posture, or social media identity. Stable confidence usually emerges from repeated experiences of effective action. Psychologist Albert Bandura's theory of self-efficacy emphasized belief in one's capacity to perform the actions required in a situation. Successful performance, often called mastery experience, is one of the most important foundations of that belief. Research drawing on self-efficacy theory continues to connect successful performance, preparation, and competence with stronger confidence. This explains why slogans are insufficient. Calling oneself powerful does not create power. Announcing disciplined does not create discipline. Describing oneself as high value does not create value. Evidence does. The evidence may include keeping promises that nobody else monitors, completing difficult work despite boredom, developing a genuinely useful skill, improving physical health, saving money consistently, communicating clearly under pressure, leaving an exploitative situation, admitting an error without collapsing into shame, resisting an impulse that would damage long-term goals. Each experience adds to an internal record. Over time, a person no longer needs to perform confidence aggressively because they possess proof of their capacity. They have endured discomfort before. They have solved hard problems. They have recovered from rejection. They have acted effectively when frightened. That produces a quieter and more credible form of self-belief. Why competence creates psychological weight? Much of what people interpret as presence is competence combined with composure. The most valuable person in a difficult room is often not the loudest. It is the person who understands what is happening, identifies the central problem, and helps create a workable decision. Competence reduces uncertainty. A competent colleague makes complex work more manageable. A competent leader provides direction during disorder. A competent friend can listen without inflaming the situation. A competent partner can address conflict without turning every disagreement into emotional warfare. Self-determination theory identifies competence as one of three core psychological needs, alongside autonomy and relatedness. Competence refers to experiencing effectiveness and mastery when interacting with the world. Autonomy concerns volition and meaningful choice, while relatedness concerns connection, warmth, and significance to others. This framework exposes a major weakness in the online untouchable man ideal. Human flourishing does not depend on autonomy and competence alone. Relatedness matters too. A person can become independent, skilled, and disciplined while remaining capable of closeness. In fact, the healthiest development involves all three: the freedom to direct one's life, the ability to act effectively, and the capacity to form meaningful relationships. Competence without relatedness can become sterile isolation. Relatedness without autonomy can become dependency. Autonomy without competence can become directionless individualism. Genuine strength requires integration. Reputation matters, but authenticity matters more. He argues that people should control the story told about them. There is truth in this. Reputation affects opportunities. Reliability compounds. So does unreliability. The way someone behaves during pressure, conflict, and failure becomes part of how others anticipate their future behavior. People remember whether someone delivers. They also remember emotional volatility, dishonesty, broken promises, and uncontrolled reactions. Reputation is not merely branding. It is accumulated expectation. Machiavelli recognized the strategic power of public appearance. His political thought paid close attention to how leaders projected qualities and managed the passions and perceptions of others. But reputation management becomes psychologically corrosive when appearance separates too far from reality. A person who attempts to look disciplined while living chaotically must constantly defend the gap. Someone who performs indifference while privately obsessing remains controlled by the very attention they pretend not to need. The stronger strategy is alignment. Build a reputation for reliability by becoming reliable. Build a reputation for competence by developing competence. Build a reputation for calmness by learning to regulate emotion. Build a reputation for standards by applying them consistently, even when doing so is inconvenient. A reputation grounded in repeated behavior requires less active management because reality supports the story. This also means accepting that not everyone will approve. Boundaries may be described as arrogance by people who benefited from their absence. Independence may look cold to someone accustomed to unlimited access. Clear disagreement may be labeled aggression by someone who expected compliance. A mature person considers criticism without automatically obeying it. They ask, is this feedback accurate? Is the source credible? Is there a repeated pattern across different people? Does changing this behavior align with my values? That is more intelligent than either extreme, living entirely for approval or dismissing every critic as threatened by one's greatness. The myth of becoming dangerous. Online masculine content frequently uses the word dangerous as praise. Usually, it does not mean physically violent. It means difficult to manipulate, highly competent, emotionally controlled, and willing to leave. Yet, the language still matters. Describing healthy development as becoming dangerous encourages an adversarial model of ordinary life. Every interaction becomes a hierarchy. Every delayed reply becomes a test. Every disagreement becomes a challenge to status. Every relationship becomes a contest over leverage. Hypervigilance is not wisdom. Some people manipulate. Others are simply tired, distracted, uncertain, imperfect, or communicating badly. A worldview that interprets every mistake as a calculated test can create the very isolation it claims to prevent. The better aim is not to become dangerous. It is to become grounded. A grounded person is difficult to manipulate because they examine evidence. They are difficult to provoke because they pause before reacting. They are difficult to exploit because they enforce boundaries. They are difficult to destabilize because their identity is not entirely dependent on another person's mood. But they remain capable of warmth, humor, generosity, and trust. They do not need everyone to fear losing them. They choose relationships in which both people value staying. 8 evidence-led principles for becoming harder to ignore. The strongest ideas within Machiavelli, Stoicism, and contemporary psychology can be translated into a healthier framework. Build substance before seeking recognition. Attention without substance is fragile. Develop expertise, judgment, health, financial stability, communication, and reliability. Recognition may follow, but even when it does not, the capability remains. The objective is not to look valuable, it is to become effective. 2. Protect your time without performing scarcity. Do not make yourself endlessly available at the expense of your work, sleep, or priorities. Equally, do not manufacture delays to create anxiety. Let limited availability emerge naturally from a well-structured life. 3. Regulate emotion rather than suppressing it. Pause before acting. Name what you feel. Separate the feeling from the conclusion. It is urging you to reach. Anger may signal a violated standard, but it does not prove that retaliation is wise. Anxiety may signal uncertainty, but it does not prove catastrophe. Desire may be powerful without deserving control over the decision. 4. Communicate boundaries once, then enforce them. Avoid endless speeches. State the issue clearly, explain the consequence where appropriate, and follow through. If the behavior continues, reduce or end access without using distance as theater. 5. Build confidence through mastery. Choose difficult but achievable commitments. Complete them repeatedly. Confidence grows more reliably from evidence than affirmation. Each completed task becomes proof that your actions are not controlled entirely by mood. 6. Become useful without becoming exploitable. Develop the ability to solve valuable problems. Bring clarity, preparation, and judgment, but distinguish contribution from rescue. Helping others should not require repeatedly sacrificing your well-being to people who refuse responsibility. 7. Choose connection without dependency. Relatedness is not weakness. Secure relationships support well-being, resilience, and growth. The objective is not to need nobody. It is to form bonds in which affection does not require self-abandonment and independence does not require emotional disappearance. 8. Let your absence be a decision, not a weapon. Sometimes leaving is necessary. Leave because the evidence demonstrates that remaining is harmful or incompatible with your values, not because you hope silence will force someone to chase you. When absence is used to manipulate, the other person still controls the objective. When absence follows a completed decision, attention returns to the future. What actually makes a person high value? The term high value is often attached to status symbols, money, appearance, popularity, sexual options, or social dominance. These may affect how people are initially perceived, but they provide an incomplete and sometimes deceptive measure. A more credible definition includes reliability. Do your words predict your actions? Competence. Can you solve meaningful problems? Emotional stability. Can you experience pressure without making everyone else absorb it? Autonomy. Can you make decisions without requiring constant approval? Relatedness. Can you form close bonds without controlling or consuming others? Integrity. Do your standards survive when dishonesty would be easier? Discernment. Can you distinguish a mistake from a pattern and criticism from manipulation? Courage. Can you act despite fear, rejection, or uncertainty? Adaptability. Can you update your beliefs when the evidence changes? Self-respect. Can you refuse treatment that repeatedly diminishes you? These traits create something deeper than social mystique. They create trust, and trust is one of the most powerful forms of human value. The final verdict, the viral psychology of becoming impossible to ignore, succeeds because it speaks to a genuine wound. Many people know what it feels like to be taken for granted. They have overgiven, over-explained, and remained available to people who offered little in return. They have confused patience with the absence of consequences. They have allowed another person's attention to determine the emotional quality of the day. The answer is not to become colder than everyone else. It is to become less governable by fear. Build a life that does not collapse when one person withdraws approval. Develop skills that make your confidence evidence-based. Learn to tolerate solitude without romanticizing isolation. Communicate directly. Enforce standards. Leave situations that repeatedly require self-betrayal. But do not mistake emotional unavailability for power. Modern psychology suggests that healthy functioning depends not only on autonomy and competence, but also on relatedness. Emotional suppression can weaken closeness. Withdrawal can damage satisfaction. Artificial scarcity can create suspicion rather than respect. Machiavelli was right that intentions alone do not determine how power operates. Stoicism was right that judgment must govern impulse. Modern psychology adds the missing element. People flourish through both self-command and meaningful connection. The most respected person is therefore not always the rarest, coldest, or most mysterious. It is often the person whose conduct is coherent. They do not chase everyone, but they do not play games. They do not reveal everything, but they do not hide behind a mask. They do not tolerate repeated disrespect, but they do not manufacture fear. They can stand alone without treating closeness as weakness. Their words carry weight because their behavior supports them. Their boundaries matter because they enforce them. Their calmness feels credible because it has been tested. Their confidence does not depend on pretending to be untouchable. It comes from knowing that whatever happens next, they will remain capable of acting with judgment, dignity, and purpose. That is not the psychology of becoming dangerous. It is the psychology of becoming difficult to diminish.